This video is going to be a doozy. I'm going to present to you some ideas that will hopefully rock your world, blow your mind. They are not fully refined. I'm still working these ideas out in my own head, and so I apologize for that fact. But there are three very big ideas that, if you understand, can help you elevate your life very quickly. They can also help you realize potentially why you're not moving your life forward as much as you want. The first one is an idea in psychology called inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness is the idea that there are infinite things going on all around you, opportunities, situations, people that you're completely unaware of because you're so focused on or distracted by whatever it is you're focused on. As one easy example, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is something that more and more people are becoming aware of, but maybe in the past they were blind to. And maybe, there's this whole mania around Bitcoin right now, and people are kicking themselves because why weren't they aware of it? Or why didn't they think more deeply about it when they'd heard of it the first time? Maybe back in 2010 when it was $1. If they had invested in it back then, they would now be a millionaire, a billionaire. So we're all blind to a lot that's around us. Actually, William James, the Harvard psychologist, he's the father of American psychology. He said that there are millions of things going on all around us that we're blind to. And the reason we're blind to them is because we're focused on what matters to us. Our experience is whatever we pay attention to. Your experience is whatever you pay attention to. William James then said, there's one difference between the genius and the ordinary person. It's not the fact that the genius has a better ability to focus. It's actually what the genius places his attention on that other people are blind to. Albert Einstein was able to put his attention on to see and to notice the laws of relativity, whereas other people are still blind to the dimensions of relativity. So the first one is blindness. And my question to you is this: what was your former self blind to that you're now not blind to? That's a really great question. What are you currently aware of, and what are you currently pursuing and seeking that your former self, could be a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, had no clue of? What are you now aware of, seeking, and pursuing, or striving for and creating in your life that your former self had no perspective of? Your former self hopefully is more blind than you are right now, but the same is true of your future self. Your future self knows more than you know. And so an obvious question is to ask yourself, what is your future self focused on, aware of? What do they value? What are they worried about? There's a great quote. It's a Chinese proverb, and it says, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And so if you want to think about what does your future self want, what should you be focusing on now? In order to actually live intentionally, you have to start thinking about where you want to go. And this brings up the second concept. And it's actually, in a lot of ways, the exact opposite concept of inattentional blindness. It's actually called strategic ignorance. So strategic ignorance is where you're strategically making yourself blind to things you don't want to be aware of. It's about creating a filter and boundaries of your attention so that you don't let certain things in. So one question is, what are a lot of things that you're currently aware of, or currently focused on, or currently distracted by that you should be blind to? In other words, what should you be strategically ignorant of? There's so many things going on out in the world today that are irrelevant to your goals or to your situation or to your values, but chances are you may be distracted. And so what are all of the things in your life, in your world, that you should become more blind to? In other words, what can you become more ignorant of on purpose? This is one of the good reasons why you would want to remove news and media. As an example, Peter Diamandis, who is a futurist, he is blind on purpose to mainstream media because it's not helpful to his goals. He sees the biases. He doesn't see value in it. Seth Godin, the famous author, he's chosen to be strategically ignorant of how people review his books on Amazon. He used to read the reviews of what people would say about his books, and he realized it was not helpful to him. And so he's chosen to be strategically ignorant. He's chosen to create rules or boundaries or a filter for his mind so that he no longer needs to see anything that's going on there because he knows it's ultimately distracting him from his purpose. Question number one is, what are you currently blind to that your future self would like you to start becoming more aware of and start thinking about so that you can start mentally preparing for those opportunities or those situations? Because right now there's things coming in and out of your orbit that you're probably not aware of because you're so focused on whatever you're focused on or distracted by whatever you're distracted by. There's once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that present themselves to you all the time. You could call them little tests that pop up and appear, and you may fail those tests because you're either underprepared. You may fail those tests because you don't even notice them. because they slipped by. Now, you don't need to be worried about what you've missed in the past. The question just becomes, what do you want to be focused on? What do you want to become prepared for? What do you want to actively prepare for right now so that your future self will thank you later? That's step number one. Step number two, what do you need to become strategically ignorant of right now? What do you need to block out so that you can actually focus? In order to create wealth, you need to create concentration. Concentration is how you create wealth. Diversification is ultimately how you protect wealth. That's what I've heard, at least. So all of this brings us to the third idea, which is selective attention. Selective attention is the idea in psychology that we all do have a worldview, and that worldview is shaped by what we give our attention to. Dr. Stephen R. Covey said we see the world not as it is, but as we are, or as we've been conditioned to see it. We all have a mental filter. Dan Sullivan said your eyes can only see and your ears can only hear what your brain is looking for. Now, if you want to be a conscious, intentional human being, then what you need to do is you need to decide what you want to direct your brain towards. Your brain is always looking for something, and whatever your brain is looking for, that's what your eyes and ears see. We see selectively. We don't see the whole world as it is, but we see the world as we are, or as we've been conditioned to see it, and as we've trained our brain to see it. And so, what do you do now? How do you take all of this? It's 3 simple strategies. Number 1, realize that right now, you're currently blind to a lot of things that your future self is going to be aware of. The sooner you think about what your future self wants and what they're up to, then the sooner you can start becoming less blind and you can start becoming strategic and begin actively preparing for that. You can rid yourself of the blindness that's currently potentially stopping you from taking massive action. Another great thing to do, though, is to continuously reflect on the progression you've made from your former self. This is what Dan Sullivan of Strategic Coach would call being in the game. Taking time to look back on what your former self was thinking about, what they were doing, what they were pursuing, versus your current self. Your current self now knows things that you used to be blind to. Actually, Daniel Kahneman, the author of Thinking Fast and Slow, he was recently interviewed by Adam Grant. And Adam Grant basically asked him, Daniel Kahneman, do you see the world the same way you did when you wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, like 10 years ago? And Daniel Kahneman was like, no, I totally see so many things that I didn't see back then. And Adam Grant was like, well, how do you feel about that? And Daniel Kahneman was like, I'm so excited about that. But then Adam Grant said, well, how does that make you feel about the book? Because the book, is limited based on what you knew in the past. And I loved what Kahneman said. He basically just said, that's all right. That was a reflection of where I was at back then. So there's no point in being mad at your former self. It's actually very powerful to recognize and appreciate the growth of what your former self saw, what they were ignorant of, what they were pursuing. Just as an example, 7-8 years ago when I was in my undergrad, I wasn't necessarily thinking about finances. I wasn't thinking about setting up my life and developing passive streams of income because I was so focused on my schoolwork. So I was blind to opportunities for building wealth because I was so focused on getting A's on my classes. And so I'm not mad at my former self, but I can also see the progression. I can see that right now, the things that I see, the things I'm aware of, the things that I'm pursuing, the goals that I have, the way I define success are all very different from my former self. But the same is also true of my future self. And if I want to live my life intentionally, I need to be first off aware that my current self is very limited. My current self is blind to many things that would potentially be advantageous to my future self. And the sooner I think about what I want my future self to be, the sooner I can start removing the blindness. In psychology, your motivation is either approach or avoid. Rather than trying to avoid what you don't want, which is a willpower way of trying to make change, what you want to do is you want to clarify what you want, and then you want to spend your time and energy approaching that. The more you do something, the more you'll want it. The more you'll do something, the more you start to see more and more of it. There's a great quote from Robert Kiyosaki. He said, intelligence is the ability to make finer distinctions. Finer distinctions means your worldview gets clearer and clearer and more specific. Rather than trying to avoid what you don't want, you clarify what you do want, and you just feed that. You feed that beast, and you start to develop clear and clearer perspective of it. You become more of an expert on it. You start to see distinctions. Where someone sees one frame, you see 50. You get a more clear expertise and perspective, and you can then move that forward. So approach what you want rather than trying to avoid what you don't. Clarify what you want, and then really educate yourself on that thing, and you'll start to become less blind, and you can actively prepare right now for your future self. On this page, you can get access to that Future Self series. Have an amazing day. Please like this. Please apply these concepts. Become less inattentionally blind to what you ultimately want. Apply strategic ignorance, and then shape your selective attention towards what your future self would want you to have. And then, as Dan would say, always measure the gain. Recognize and appreciate the growth that you've had. Have an amazing day. See you.